If you've made it through the primary application and all of those secondary essays, you can take a deep breath and rest knowing that the hardest part of the medical school application is behind you. But there's still one last step before you receive that acceptance. That's the medical school interview. But don't worry, because in this video, we're gonna go over everything you need to know to be prepared. Stay tuned. What's up YouTube? My name is J.R. Smith, and over the past couple of weeks we've been going over everything related to the medical school application. I've even walked us through my own personal application and all of my personal business so that you can use my application as an example when you're filling out your own. So be sure to check out the previous videos if you haven't yet. But in this video we're going to be wrapping up our medical school application playlist by discussing the most fun part of this process, the medical school interview. After you submit your primary application and your secondary essays, schools will begin a very thorough review of your application. And again, like we discussed in the last video, schools will only send interview invitations to about 10% of the people who end up applying to their school. So as you can see, it's extremely difficult to get an interview invitation from a medical school. But the good news is that once you receive that interview invite, that's an indicator that that school legitimately wants you as a student. I'd equate getting an interview invitation to basically having your application accepted. The school likes what they see on paper, they found your story compelling, and they believe that you're going to be a great fit for their school in particular. But once they've accepted your application, they need to meet you in order to accept you as a candidate. So they send you an invitation to interview at their school. Now, medical schools hold their interview days 1 to 2 days a week from September all the way through February in some cases, and applicants interview in groups roughly from 15 to 30 students at a time, depending on what school it is. Now, the interview day includes much more than just the actual interview. The day usually begins with an orientation where you're able to meet the other applicants who are interviewing. The admissions coordinator gives a brief presentation covering all things related to the school, including things like life in that city, the curriculum, clubs that you can join, and what a typical day looks like for a medical student. The day will often also include a lunch with current medical students at that school, and this is a good time that you can talk to them because no one really knows what life is like as a medical student at that school more than the medical students at that school. You'll also receive a tour of their facilities, including their medical school building and the associated hospitals, and this is also often given by a medical student. And then there's the actual interview. Now I'm going to briefly go over the different interview formats, but if you want a more thorough explanation of each type, make sure you check out my medical school interview playlist where I go over every interview experience I had in much more detail. So each school will have a particular interview format. These include traditional, group, panel, and MMI, or multiple mini interviews. Now, a traditional interview is the first thing you think of in an interview. You're sitting across from an interviewer, chopping it up, they're asking you questions, you're answering them, having a good conversation, 30 minutes go by and you're done. These interviews are usually done by faculty and in some cases done by fourth-year medical students. And from my experience, these are always completely conversational. They're not bombarding you with questions or trying to test you in any way. All they're doing is trying to get to know you. Remember, if you made it this far, they already really like you, and the last thing they want to do is run you away by scaring you through some traumatic interview experience. Typical questions you can expect in this interview format include things like, why do you want to be a doctor? Why do you want to come to our school in specific? What are your strengths and weaknesses, etc. Some schools may have a single traditional interview, some may have two, and even others may have one traditional interview and one group interview. The group interview, or group activity as some schools refer to it as, is the school's opportunity to assess a candidate's ability to work with others. So from my experience, you'll be partnered up with 1 to 2 other applicants and you'll tackle a certain prompt while being assessed by either current medical students or faculty members. And the prompt can read anything like, if you are hospital administration and you are given $100 million to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, how are you going to allocate these funds? And then they'll give you a list of possible categories that you and your partners can choose from. There's no right answer in these cases. The goal is not to figure out what the interviewer wants to hear. They just want to see how well you can converse with your partners. And so it's important that you're willing to share your ideas and take part in the conversation with your group, but that does not mean you get crazy and try to dominate everything. Another interview format I've experienced is the panel interview, and this is very similar to the traditional interview. The only difference is now you're being interviewed by multiple people at the same time. You may also be in groups, and in these cases the interview will ask a question and then each applicant will give their answer one after the other. Though this may sound extremely intimidating, I actually greatly enjoyed my experience with the panel interview. The interviewers did a great job again at keeping things extremely conversational. The other applicants were amazing. Nobody was trying to one-up the other person, and it was a good opportunity for me to learn more in a more intimate setting about my other applicants, which will end up eventually being colleagues. The final interview format is personally one of the most difficult interview formats I experienced, and that is the MMI, or multiple mini interviews. The MMI is a format that addresses the risk of biases. In a traditional interview, if you have one bad experience with an interviewer, that one bad experience can completely destroy your candidacy. The MMI allows students to meet with multiple interviewers and is set up so students rotate through a series of stations, each involving a particular interaction that's based on a given prompt. So imagine 10 applicants standing in a hallway, each facing a door which reads a specific prompt. The applicants will have about 2 minutes or so to read the prompt, and then there'll be a bell over an intercom or something indicating now they enter that room through that door. There'll be an interviewer standing on the other side of that door, and then you fulfill whatever that prompt has you do with that interviewer for about 6 to 10 minutes given the school. From my experience, there are 4 main station types. 1, the traditional interview station, where again you're just asked things like why do you want to be a doctor or why our school in specific. 2, ethical scenarios, which presents a dilemma and assesses how you can come to an ethical solution. 3, teamwork stations, where you're partnered up with another applicant and tasked to complete a challenge in front of a faculty member who's examining you. And 4, the acting station, where you have to assume a specific role, such as a doctor, and you have to play out that role in a given scenario with an interviewer, who in this case may be a relative to your patient, and you may have to break bad news to them or something. Again, I go into much more detail of each interview format in my medical school application playlist, and I'll provide a link to this playlist in the description below. But from my personal experience, the MMI, though it can be intimidating, is actually one of the most fun interview formats that I experienced. It seems to do a good job in identifying certain characteristics that an applicant may have based on their responses to certain scenarios, and from an applicant standpoint, it's kind of like a game show. So now that you know the typical type of interview formats, what can you do to ensure that you're an applicant who stands out for the right reason? Like everything else we've talked about in this playlist, the first place to start is by finding out what the admissions committee is looking for. No, this is not so that you can fake something that you're not or put up a front. They'll be able to sense any form of deception or lack of authenticity right away. Rather, we want to know what admissions committees are looking for so that we can begin developing those certain character traits, and so that we can recognize which ones we do have that we should seek to emphasize during our interviews. So when I was preparing for my medical school interview, I read a book called The Medical School Interview: Winning Strategies from Admissions Faculty by Drs. Samir Desai and Rajani Kata. And if you want to get a full comprehensive understanding of what admissions committees are looking for in an applicant, I recommend this book. But I'm going to do my best job to give a good summary here. So they reported a recent survey taken by medical school admissions officers, which represented over 90% of the medical schools in the United States, and asked the question, which personal qualities are most commonly assessed during an interview? And the following characteristics were mentioned most. So as you can see, we have personal characteristics in the left-hand column and the percentage of admissions officials who indicated that they look for these traits during an interview in the right-hand column. I recommend getting this book if you want to see the entire list, but for the purposes of this video, let's just look at the characteristics that more than 85% of admissions officers are looking for. So we have motivation for a medical career, compassion and empathy, personal maturity, oral communication, service orientation, and professionalism. These are key characteristics for a physician to have, and schools have to physically meet you because they can't assess these traits by what they see on paper alone. So how does this list help you? Well, the best place to start when you're preparing for an interview is to first undergo thorough self-assessment. This means looking through your experiences and seeing which community service activities best display your compassion, or which employment opportunities best illustrate your professionalism, and most importantly, what experiences have you had that have motivated your passion for a career in medicine. This self-assessment will help you convey these important characteristics and skills, and when you're answering questions, you'll be able to do so in a way that draws the interview's attention to these important characteristics that you have. That brings me to my next point. What type of questions will be most frequently asked? So again, the most prevalent question that you will be asked during a medical school interview is, why do you want to be a doctor? If we look back at our list, we see that the number one most sought after characteristic is a motivation for a career in medicine. So it's only fitting that this question is asked in some way at almost every, if not every, medical school that you interview at. This is a question that you should have a prepared answer for. No, that does not mean you rehearse it to the point of you sounding like a robot. You just want to know the direction that you'll take your answer when you're faced with this question. Other questions that you can expect to hear during your medical school interview include things like, why are schooling specific? Tell me more about that research activity that you talked about in your primary application. What are your strengths and weaknesses? And why do you think that you'll make a great doctor? And so again, you should have prepared answers for these questions. And again, not to the point of you sounding rehearsed and like a robot, but you should know which direction you're going to for each one of those questions, because those are questions that are going to be high yield and very likely that you'll experience during your medical school interviews. Another subset of question types that you can expect during a medical school interview are what are called behavior-based interview questions. And these questions seek to use past behavior in a given situation to predict future behavior in a similar scenario. An example could be like, tell me about a time that you experienced a colleague who was difficult to work with, and how did you respond to that situation? And the way that you describe this experience and how you responded to it is going to be indicative to the interviewer on how you will behave in the future. During my interview prep, I generated a pretty extensive list of possible questions that I may be asked during my interviews, including a lot of behavior-based interview questions. And so I'll make sure to leave a link in the description below to that document so that you can use that as practice. You want to be extremely comfortable answering questions on the fly, and so one thing that I would recommend is having a friend or family member ask you certain questions on that list in a random order, and then you're going to be able to gauge how prepared you are at answering those questions based on how comfortable and fluid your responses are to the random questions asked by your friend or family member. So now you know what characteristics you need to emphasize about yourself throughout your interview day. You're getting comfortable answering questions in a fluid but not robotic way. But now I want to go over a few things that you also should think about during the interview season. Again, schools will begin sending invitations to interview between August all the way through February. And the first thing you want to do when you get this interview invite is to celebrate. Getting an interview invite is the biggest hurdle along this journey to getting accepted to a medical school. And it means that a specific school is extremely interested in you as a candidate. The next thing you want to do is sign up for an interview date. They'll offer interview dates roughly 1 month after sending you the interview invitation, and you want to make sure that you sign up for a date as soon as possible because those dates will fill up early. You will also have to plan your own travel and housing, and because medical school interviews only take place at that school's campus, this often involves having to buy a plane ticket and a night or two at the closest hotel. However, many medical schools offer the option of staying with a student host. These hosts are current medical students, and I would definitely recommend taking advantage of this opportunity if the school offers it, because not only do you save money by not having to purchase a night or two at a hotel, but you're able to get significant time with a current medical student, and during this time you're able to get all the questions you may have answered, as well as just get a general feel of what being a medical student at that school is like. Another expense you should plan for is the cost of proper attire. Going back to our list, we see that medical schools look for candidates who display professionalism. And these interviews are business formal, and as bad as it may seem, the first impression you give to somebody is often from what they see. Yes, you can potentially make up from a bad first impression, but do yourself a favor and start on a good note. The field of medicine is a very traditional interview, and so they expect well-fitted, neutral colored suits like black or dark blue, free of wrinkles and little to no jewelry. Khakis and a polo won't be the best look, but neither will this. You can find subtle ways to stand out or make your outfit pop a little more, like nice dress socks or a nice watch, but don't use your attire to make a statement. Let your interview do that. So like we talked about earlier, the interview day includes a variety of events that are not the actual interview. However, you are being evaluated throughout the entire day. This may sound stressful, but you can expect their eyes to be on every single one of your behaviors through the orientation, the lunch, the tour, etc. But the good news is, all they're looking for is someone who is enthusiastically interested in medicine and socially competent enough to work well with others. Those two things basically sum up the top 10 characteristics that schools are looking for in a candidate during the interview. So you should look like you want to be there, as you should, showing enthusiasm and excitement, and you should look interested in getting to know your fellow applicants. That doesn't mean you should be bouncing off of the walls, because you still want to demonstrate maturity, but you should not be on a tour of a multi-million-dollar medical facility looking bored and disinterested. You also want to illustrate your ability to communicate well with others, and this doesn't just apply to the faculty, staff, or the current medical students, but this applies to the other applicants that you're interviewing with. And not only will this demonstrate your ability to interact well in a very social industry, but this will also make the interview day a lot more enjoyable. Getting free lunches, going on tours of amazing campuses, and learning more and more about an incredible career path is that much more enjoyable when you get to experience those things alongside other people. You really get to meet truly amazing people while interviewing, and again, it's not just limited to the faculty and the staff, some of these world-renowned physicians that you may get to meet on your interviews, but the people who are interviewing alongside of you are truly remarkable in their own right. If they made it this far, they must have just as incredible stories, and ultimately they're going to be your colleagues in the future, so you should find pleasure in being able to meet them, and you should find excitement in doing this interview alongside them. My final tip to consider is turning your phone completely off. Not on moon mode or do not disturb, not silenced, but completely off. Trust me, going on the tours, I wanted to take photos and videos, and after every event, I wanted to call my wife up and tell her how everything is going. But when your phone is off, it's going to allow you to be much more present during this experience, and having a present mindset throughout the interview experience is only going to benefit you. And I must say, I have seen on multiple occasions a phone go off either during an orientation or while a faculty member is speaking, and trust me, you do not want to be that applicant. So I think that should be everything you need to know about the medical school interview. But if you have any questions or suggestions for topics I should expand on, let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, make sure to give me a thumbs up, and if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe, tap that bell, share this video with someone who may find it useful. That's the best way you can support me and this channel. As this series ends, we have some very exciting videos on the horizon, including finding out where I'll be going to medical school. But until then, keep evolving, and I'll see you guys next time.
You done, babe?
Yep, just finished.
Ooh, I can't wait to be in the next one.